it's Presley at ActOutGames.com here for a Presley's perspective on something, because if you're new to these Presley's perspectives, my dad is going to tell me about something recent that's happened in the news. By the way, I never watch the news ever, so this is all new to me, and I have no idea what we're going to be talking about. So let's see what happens.
Okay, so
our camera got cut off.
Our camera cut off.
I don't know why. The battery didn't die or anything, but the camera cut off. So
yeah, we talked pretty long.
Yeah.
But yeah, so the camera cut off on us last night while we were talking. So we shot this little content warning at the very end. We lost that, and there were a couple of things Presley made some good points at the end of the video. So we're gonna reshoot a couple of the tail end of the conversation and just kind of cut it in. We'll tell you when that comes in. It's gonna be 20 minutes from now or so, 30 minutes from now. But the big thing we want to stick on here is, like Presley said, people may not know what a Presley's perspective is. She's got a lot of new subscribers, and we're really happy about that. We love having the new subscribers. But the Presley's perspective, Presley and I just sit down and have sort of a cold conversation about something that's going on in the world.
I do not know what it is.
Doesn't know what it is. Yeah. It's
something from the news normally. Yeah. I don't pay attention to the news.
Yeah.
At all. Right. I don't watch the news. I watch YouTube, not the news. Right. So I do not know anything about these. Yeah. And I don't know what we're going to be talking about either. And
they can be controversial, right? So they're usually controversial topics. That's what makes it worth having a conversation about. And whenever that happens, people are going to be offended by what we talk about sometimes. So if that's something you're worried about and you don't want to watch that, then yeah, definitely skip this one and go to tomorrow's video. We'll be
if you're easily offended, then go tomorrow, because we are doing something cool tomorrow.
Yeah, if you want to engage in the conversation, jump in the comments. But definitely, we definitely don't feel bad if people don't want to watch these. Depending on the topic, what the topic is, you see it in the description. We're talking about Ferguson today and racism in America, is what we talked about last night. And so, if that's something that you don't want to watch a video on, you feel like you might be offended by, then yeah, this may not be the best for you.
Yes. Okay. Go jump on tomorrow, where we're going to do something.
Come back tomorrow. Yeah.
And it's probably not going to offend anyone.
Yeah. Right. Okay. So let's we'll jump back into what we shot last night, and then we'll add the tail end of the conversation. We'll cut back in.
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, I don't know, anyone knowing that we're talking about current events shouldn't be too surprised that we're talking about what's going on in Ferguson, what happened in Ferguson, and what's still kind of going on in Ferguson. And broader issues as well, but we'll start with Ferguson. So I assume you don't know anything about it.
I know that it sounds like a place in Wyoming for some reason.
Not a place in Wyoming, it's in Missouri.
It sounds like, it sounds like...
Yeah.
I can't find the right state, but it sounds like, yeah.
We'll start, I'll tell you the story of what happened.
Yes.
And then we'll talk more about why it's a big deal, right? And you can kind of tell me what you think about the story too. But, so, what happened was, there was this kid named Michael Brown. Now he's a kid, he's not like you kid, he was older, I don't remember how old he was, I'd have to look and see. He's a teenager. Yes. Okay, he's a big guy though, like football player, big 6'4", 6'6", something like that, 290 pounds. He's a big guy.
That's tall.
Yeah, he's just a big guy. So he was he went with a friend of his to like a little convenience store, and he stole some cigars, like a little pack of cigarette kind of things, right? And he snagged them, and the store owner kind of tried to stop him from leaving with them, and he pushed the guy out of the way and walked out the door with his friend, right? It's a little more complicated than that, but we'll just leave it at that, right? So
and why is this super big?
Why is he super big?
Yeah.
You mean why is it a big deal?
Yeah.
Oh, we haven't gotten to the big deal yet. That's not the story. Yeah. It's the preamble to the story. So he walks out with these things, he steals it, he kind of strong arms the guy, and he leaves. And he's walking home, or either to his house or to his friend's house, and they're walking down the middle of the street. Instead of walking on the sidewalk, they're walking kind of like right on the yellow line down the middle of the street. And while they're walking, this policeman pulls up beside them and sees them walking down the middle of the street. And so as he drives by, he either has his window down or he rolls his window down and he yells, "Hey, get on the sidewalk. What are you guys doing?" Maybe he cussed at him a little bit. There's disagreement about that, but let's say he did. He told him to get on the sidewalk. And they said, "Hey, we're almost where we're going. What's it to you? Leave us alone." And so the policeman never even stopped, right? He just kind of drove by them and told them to get on the sidewalk. They kind of said no. Maybe it wasn't as polite as "Would you please get on the sidewalk?" "No, thank you, sir." We'll keep going on, right?
Yeah,
there was probably some profanity flying, right? And so the cop says as he got past them, he realized that the big guy, it's a big guy and a little guy, the big guy had some cigars in his hand. And he had heard a call on the radio that somebody had stolen some cigars, right? And so he's like, oh, that must be the guy that stole the cigars. So I need to go back and talk to him. And so he stopped his truck, put it in reverse, and backed up and kind of turned to where he was right with those guys. He kind of cut them off with his car, right? And so he's like, you're the big guy and I'm the cop. When he stops, they're just kind of face to face right here, okay? So again, there's a little bit of debate about whether the police officer realized that that was the suspect that stole the cigars, that he kind of heard it over the radio and realized, and that's why he went back to talk to them, or maybe he was mad that they yelled at him and didn't get on the sidewalk when he told them to. There's some debate about. There's a debate about a lot of this. I'll try and tell you what's sort of fact and what.
There's too much debate on basically everything. Like,
well, this is like when something like this happens. It's what one person said versus another person. It's not on video. There's like, you don't know what happened. So a lot of times in these court cases like this and things like this happen, you don't know. It's debatable. You have to know, who do you believe? What does the evidence say? Right. That's part of why we're having this conversation. Right. So we'll get into that here in a second. So everyone agrees. The cop went past. He stopped, backed up, and kind of cut the guy off. So he's saying he was going to get out of the car and check the guy out and see if it was really the guy that stole the cigar, or he was going to talk to whatever he was going to do. So he starts to open his door. Okay? Now here's where stories kind of differ a little bit. So the door got slammed back when he opened the door. And if you talk to the people that are on Michael Brown's side, they say he threw his door open, but Michael Brown was just standing right there, and so the door hit him and bounced off and slammed shut. Okay? If what the cop says is that when I started to open my door, Michael Brown slammed my door shut to keep me from getting out of the car. Okay? So he tried to open his door got shut. One way or the other, either bounced off of him or the guy actively pushed it back. Michael Brown actually pushed it back. And then they got into a verbal confrontation. That pissed everybody off, and so everybody started yelling at each other. And
wait, which people? The people who are defending
the cop,
Michael Brown cop?
Michael Brown and the police officer got really pissed at each other. And so they're yelling at each other, and there's lots of profanity flying around. And it ends up, everybody agrees that Michael Brown ended up with sort of like the top half of his body sort of in the car, struggling with the policeman. They were fighting, right? And so Michael Brown's friend says that the policeman reached out of the car and grabbed Michael Brown and kind of pulled him in the car and was trying to, I don't know what he was trying to do, he was pulled him in the car and they were fighting. The policeman says Michael Brown kind of came in after he slammed the door, that he reached in and started struggling with him and punching him, and that Michael Brown was punching him and they were fighting. And so the cop's sitting in the car, Michael Brown is sort of leaning in the window or right outside the window, and they're fighting, and everybody agrees that there's this struggle going on. And so the cop starts thinking, or he says, I start thinking, what am I going to do? This guy's punching me, and I'm going to get knocked out, and I can't reach my mace, which is over here, like my pepper spray kind of stuff, and my baton's behind me, and I can't get it. All I've got's my gun. And so he takes his right hand and pulls his gun out to try and get the guy to back away. When he pulls his gun out, the guy sees the gun, and they start fighting over the gun. Okay? And so this seems to be kind of more or less agreed on. He pulled his gun out, and they started kind of struggling over the gun a little bit, right? And then as they're struggling over the gun, the policeman shot him. When he shot him in the car, he pulled the trigger. It hit the guy's hand, hit Michael Brown's hand, so his hand was somewhere around the gun. Whether he was reaching for the gun, they were fighting over the gun. Again, it's what one person says versus what somebody else says. The bullet hit his hand though, and he was cut on his thumb, and there was blood in the car, so you could tell it kind of happened there. Went through the door and hit Michael Brown. It probably hit him somewhere like in the stomach or the hip, something like that. I think it's hard to, I don't know which of the things was. So when that happened, they said everybody like freaked out, like panicked, and it's like, oh my God, what happened? And Michael Brown kind of took a step back. This is according to policemen. Michael Brown took a step back and then got even madder and came back into the car, like reaching in was even madder, and so he shot again. And the second time he missed him. He said he saw like a cloud of smoke back behind him where the bullet went and hit. And so Michael Brown took off running. And everybody agrees There was a shot in the car, at least one shot. It turns out there were two. There were shell casings. They found the bullets. Remember when we were in Tennessee and we were shooting, the bullet kind of flies out, the empty bullet does? So there were 2 empty bullets right there. So they could tell he shot twice right there. Go ahead. Anything you have to say, please say.
Yeah, just speaking of shell casings, me and my friends were taking a nature walk at this water purification class thing, and we found like 50 different shell casings. Yeah.
That's not good. Yeah, somebody was probably out there hunting where they weren't supposed to be hunting. It's kind of poaching, like you were talking about the other day. So yeah, so they found the 2 shell casings in the car. So there were 2 shots fired in the car. One of them hit Michael Brown, as far as we know. And Michael Brown started running, which he got shot, and he got a guy with a gun. I'm not surprised by that. So the policeman jumps out of the car and kind of starts chasing him to try and catch him, right? And so they run down the street a little ways, and again, here things get a little bit, there's disagreement in some of the testimony. There's lots of people, there's several people that saw it, that witnessed what was happening. Most people started watching while they were fighting in the car. Like that's what kind of drew their attention. And so they started watching, and so everybody kind of saw them get out, and the rest of this people saw, but when people describe it, they describe it really differently. And we'll talk about that in a second too. But so they ran, and at some point, Michael Brown stopped running and turned around and came back towards the police officer, okay? So some of the witnesses say that he didn't do that, that he was running away and he stopped and turned around and surrendered, like raised his hands, and some people even say he got down on his knees and surrendered. But the physical evidence, when they look at the crime scene, they saw, remember he got shot when he was in the car, leaning in the car, right? And so they see he was bleeding, and so they could see his blood go away from the car and then start to come back. So they can kind of see that he started coming back towards the officer. So some people say he kind of gave up and turned around and was walking back towards the officer saying, okay, I give up. The officer said that he was charging him, that he was really angry and still pissed off, and he turned around and just started running at him like he was going to attack him. And so the officer shot him again, several times this time. And he didn't stop. He kept coming. And he was coming even closer, and when he got about 10 feet away from the cop, the cop said he sort of bent down and was going to tackle him, and the cop shot him sort of a third burst of shot, and that time it killed him. It hit him in the top of the head, and he died instantly and sort of fell. Okay, so that's what happened, or that's what we've heard happen from different people, and we'll talk a little bit about how different people say different things.
Well, that makes sense why that's on the news.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, and it's a big deal, right? The bigger deal, but the reason it's one of the main reasons it's a huge deal is because the policeman was white and the guy that he shot was black. And so... So? Well, right, it should be so. It should be so. But there's a real question about whether that was important and whether the same thing would have happened if that wasn't true. Like specifically, if the kid was white, would the cop have shot him? Right? That's the real question, right? Is racism involved in what happened there? Okay?
Well, what happened there so far sounds like no. Someone's trying to steal cigarettes, they get mad.
Yeah, so right, there's an argument, and you have to be careful some of the things with what you infer. Like, I'll tell you later what I think actually happened, right? But it's just what I think. I don't know it. If I was on a jury that was listening to that, I wouldn't use any of that to convict or not convict. It's just kind of what you think happened. Like when you're in a jury and you're looking at things, you have to think about what you can prove, right? So what they were able to prove, sort of, you know, like I said, what the physical evidence shows was there was a shot, 2 shots in the car. Michael Brown was hit inside the car because there was blood inside the car. He ran away, and he was coming back towards the officer, or he came back towards the officer when he was shot. Now, whether he was aggressively coming back, or whether he was just walking back and trying to surrender.
Well, I know a thing. Yeah. If you could kind of tell where the blood spatters really close together or far apart, depends.
That's excellent. Like yeah, and I haven't read about that, but I've heard some people kind of talking about that, right? So you can tell if he was running, the blood drops would be further apart, right? Than if he was walking or staggering or something, they'd be close together. You want to look at the physical evidence and try and figure out what happened, right? So, the problem that you run into here, like, is that it's this thing that happened is bigger than this one incident that I just described to you, right? Mm-hmm. Like, it would be nice to look at this thing in isolation, just as the thing that happened here in this one time. But the problem is there's this history of, like, police brutality towards blacks, right? And it goes back to when there was, like, or not institutional racism, but like legal race. There were laws that were racist laws. I mean, black people couldn't vote for a long time. They couldn't marry interracial marriages in the back of the bus. Like, those laws were very racist, right? And so I was trying to think of a way, as I was trying to think of a way to have this conversation with you today, I was trying to think of a good analogy, a good way to kind of describe some of this to you, and I thought of a physics analogy that I thought you might like, right? So it's called inertia, is kind of what it is, right? So back then there were these laws about racism, and they were, I would say, they were pushing racism forward. Right? So you had these things where black people are sitting in the back of the bus, they can't vote, there's no interracial marriage.
They had to go to different schools, use different
schools, all of these things are happening, and that is just pushing racism forward, right? And when we're talking about racism here, we're talking about whites towards blacks. There's all kinds of other, like, minorities, and I'm not saying there's not racism there. This case is just about whites and blacks. So when they changed those laws, and they stopped saying, you know, you can discriminate. Like, it used to be illegal to not hire somebody because they were black. You can't do that anymore. There used to be
hire someone for your skills and not what they look like.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So there's all these. They stopped having these laws that were pushing racism forward, right? But if you think about it in terms of inertia, if it was being pushed forward, and then all you do is you stop pushing, what happens?
It just stops. It kind of goes a little bit. According to inertia, it will keep going forward until something acts on it.
It keeps going until something acts on it. That's exactly right. So stopping.
Unless there's friction.
But that's friction acting on it. That's something acting on it, right? So the stopping pushing on it doesn't stop it. It keeps it from accelerating, maybe, but it's built up all of this inertia, and it's still moving forward. So this is sort of the argument for where racism is in America today, is that it's built up all of this inertia, and just because we don't have these laws in place anymore, and just because we talk about it differently, and people do behave differently, we're sort of waiting on friction to slow it down and stop it eventually.
Someone act on
racism, rather than acting, right? Rather than acting on it and stopping it, right? And so that's sort of the argument. All these things have been happening, and these unarmed kids have been being shot and killed, or if you look at just the justice system, a black defendant, like if a black man commits the same crime as a white man, by and large, that black man goes to jail for longer. Gets a tougher sentence. Like, these things still happen. It's just institutional. It's just built into the institution, and we're not. You could argue, and I would argue, that we're not doing enough to stop it. We're not applying a force to slow it down and stop it. We're just letting it sort of peter out on its own, and that's not going to be the fastest thing in the world.
It's not that hard.
So all of these things have been going on, and this case happened in that context, right? And so people are thinking about, you know, well, is it this institutional racism that, like, and you get the extremes. Like, on one extreme, you've got people that think that this police officer woke up that morning deciding he was going to go hunt a black man and kill a black man that day, right? People believe that, right? And it could be, right? And there are people out there that would do that. There is no doubt that there are people out there who would do that, right? On the other extreme, you've got people who say that there is that it wouldn't matter if it was you that stole the cigars, that the exact same thing would have played out. That it didn't matter that it was a 6'4", 290-pound black man.
I hope that is true.
That's not true.
Yeah.
This is Presley's perspective, and we'll get to your take on it in a second, but I don't go for either of those extremes, right? I think it's kind of somewhere in the middle. It's a little blended, right?
Well, yeah, I hope that is not specifically because he's black, but it might be because...
Yeah, so what I think is, we'll get into a little bit of what I think, and then we'll start having a conversation about it, because I'm curious what you think about it. And I honestly, I don't know. I'm curious. You guys can comment on this too, if you're still watching this. Part of me loves the fact that this is such an alien conversation to you, right? Because it doesn't make sense to you that why would him being black have anything to do with it? I think it's brilliant that as every generation, you're the friction. Every generation is the friction that's slowing down racism, because you don't see it that way, right? But in some ways, I feel these conversations are important to have, but because you should be aware that these things are happening out in the world, right? So while it's awesome that you're just oblivious to the fact that people think this way, I think it's important that you understand that people do think this way sometimes, and that the bigger problem is, like, I don't think that the officer thought about race. Like, I don't think he consciously thought, I'm going to kill this guy because he's black. What I do think is that he was more scared of Michael Brown than he would have been of a white kid, even the same size, even a big white kid. Just subconsciously, just the way society works, just the inertia behind racism. Like what he's supposed to do is, if he's in fear for his life, then he can use deadly force. He can kill someone to save himself and protect his life, right? And so his argument is, I was in fear for my life. And I think that may well be true. I don't know, like I'm a little sketchy on that, honestly, but I think maybe he was scared that he was about to be killed and that he needed to kill the guy to save himself, right? But if that's the case, I think he felt that way because Michael Brown was black. And had Michael Brown been a big white guy, he probably, a big unarmed white guy, I think that's important in this conversation. It's not like he had a gun, right? He would have either stepped back and waited for backup to show up. He might have even fought him and like struggled with him to apprehend, to arrest him, to try and find a way to arrest him and not kill him. And certainly had it been you, you know, 4 foot tall white woman, he wouldn't have felt his life was in danger. He would have felt like he could have apprehended you without having to shoot you, right?
Yeah. I'm really sure. I don't even know.
Yeah, I mean, not you. Like that's hyperbole, right? I'm overstating for it to be a kid. But if it was mommy, or if it was me, even, right? Like, I don't think I would have gotten shot in that situation, right? And like, that means that racism played a part. And even if it wasn't a conscious decision on his part, even if he right now doesn't think he did it because Michael Brown was black, he did it because he was in fear for his life, right? I think the reason he felt like he was in fear for his life is because Michael Brown was black and because society is still pretty racist in that kind of area. He was scared. And we've talked about before when we did like the Prop 9 thing, people are scared of things that are different and things they don't know. And we have this huge problem in the world in that like the races don't interact with each other at all, right? And one of the things Mommy and I really loved about living in Hawaii is it was very multicultural. There were people from all over the world living in Hawaii, and we got to spend time with them, and I worked with people, and our friends were from all over the place. And then we moved to Denver, and that's definitely not the case in Denver, right? Very white in Denver. You don't spend a lot of time around minorities and other races and things like that. And
I still had a friend who I knew, and she was black, and we were still really good friends. Yeah, she was really nice.
And I'm not saying, I'm just saying you don't have as much opportunity here to do that. And then the races still tend to sort of segregate themselves. Like they choose to live in different areas and not spend as much time with each other. And we've got to overcome that like before we can start pushing too hard on stopping that inertia, right? And so the other thing that just happened.
The thing is, I thought Martin Luther King, he was the force, but apparently not.
No, I mean, he was trying, but the problem is Martin Luther King was on the side that was being racist against, right? And so, like, if you're the ball that's rolling because of inertia, you can't stop the ball from rolling. It's got to be an outside force, right? It's got to be something coming in. So what he was trying to do is raise awareness and consciousness so that other people would stop being racist. He can't stop people from being racist against him, right? He was on the wrong side of that equation. And so he was trying to raise awareness and consciousness and make people aware of what happened. And he made huge strides. Like we've made enormous progress, but it's still there. And cases like this show where it's still there. I mean, one more thing, and then we'll have more of a conversation. So what happened, they went to the grand jury, a thing called a grand jury, which is where it's kind of like a trial, but it's a group of people that kind of decide whether you should go to trial or not. Is there enough evidence to go to trial? And so they were going to see whether the police officer should go on trial, not be convicted, not go to jail, nothing, just should he be tried for killing Michael Brown when he didn't need to kill him, right? Was it excessive use of force? And just a few days ago, the grand jury came back and said, no, he shouldn't even go to trial. That what he did was okay, and there's not a likelihood that he committed a crime in what he did. He was defending himself, and so he shouldn't go to jail. And so that spun into all kinds of protests and riots even, and people are burning buildings in Missouri in protest of what happened, and looting, and like all kinds of chaos is going on. And so I don't agree with that necessarily either. But I guess one of the things that I should have said early on, and I'll probably go back and put this at the beginning, is that one important thing that you have to realize too, like we're having this conversation and you're sort of oblivious to the racism, you don't know about the racism that exists in the world, you don't feel that way, and you don't think that way, and that's great. But because of that, it's really important to understand that you and I can never really understand what it's like to be on the other side of racism. People who live with it every day, like just subtly, you go into a store and the store manager's kind of following you around because they think you might steal something, or they're asking, hey, can I help you find something here? Or you're doing something, you're hanging out with your friends and a policeman stops and sort of asks you what you're doing there, maybe even searches you. Like, you don't get away with speeding, you get stopped and interrogated, and like all of these things happen every day, and these people live with these things every day, and you and I will never understand what that's like. And so we have to be really careful even stating too much of an opinion too strongly about what it's like and what people should do in the face of those kinds of things, right? Because we can't understand it. You can understand it rationally and you can reason through it, but when you're living it every day, it's a completely different ballgame, right? Does that make sense to you a little bit? Yeah. So that's the big thing that's happening in Ferguson and Michael Brown, right? So it's about the shooting that happened in Ferguson, but it's about a lot more than that. It's about institutional racism, and it's about the inertia of this thing still moving forward and people not stepping up and doing enough to stop it, and people making the argument, hey, we stopped pushing. What more do you want us to do? We've done everything that we can possibly do. We're not pushing anymore, and it's not fair. It's not fair to push back the other way, right? And we want everything to be equal, so we're just not going to push either direction. But that doesn't work because it's already moving in that direction, and so you have to push back a little bit to stop that inertia, to bring it to rest. And then you stop pushing and nobody pushes and everybody's equal. And that's kind of where we end up. So that's a ton. That's more of a soliloquy than I usually go on these. But I'm curious, just in general, what your thoughts are on the stuff that I just talked about.
Well, honestly, I still am not sure if it was because of racism or it was because he's really tall and really, like, I would be scared in that situation, not specifically because he was black, because he was really tall and big, and he would definitely seem a lot threatening, especially to me, because I'm short, really short. Yeah. I would be threatened, really scared and threatened, but it would be in the same occasion if the skin.
It's a good point, and there's different things, right? So there's, like I said before, there's kind of what we think happened and why we think he did it, and then there's this whole thing about what we think it could prove. So I think they should have gone to trial. I think the grand jury was wrong. I think that they should have taken it to trial. There's enough evidence and witnesses that said things happened and a confusion that it's not clear 100% that he was just defending himself. I think it should have gone to trial. Yeah. I think he probably should not have been convicted once it went to trial. I think there's not enough evidence. I mean, you're presumed innocent until it's proven that you're guilty, and I don't think you could prove that he wasn't trying to defend himself.
Well, yeah, he should go to trial and be tested whether, like, what has happened. At least people should look at the evidence more and see what has happened.
Yeah, I agree.
Also, I have a tiny bit of experience on which side should I trust. Although it's because I played an adventure map where you had to decide which side you would trust. So there's one story, there's this king, and he was saying there were some evil zombies, and if you could bring me the zombie king's head, then I would give you the thing you're looking for in the adventure map. Then you would go to the zombie side, and the zombie would say, the evil king turned us into zombies with the thing you're looking for in the adventure map. So if you bring me his head, then I'll show you a secret tunnel through. And it's really big, whether you trust the king or you trust the zombie. It
happened in Fallout 3, too. I don't know if you remember with the zombies. It was like that one luxury hotel, and they were saying the zombies were raiding and killing everybody, and the zombies were saying, no, they kicked us out. And did. So it's the same kind of thing, right?
That probably was based off of it, though.
But you need, like, right. I think you're right. You have to go by evidence. You have to look at the evidence and see what really happened, or what you can prove happened. And there's a whole lot of what you think happened. And like I said, I think he felt like his life was in danger, probably, but I think he did feel that because of race, and not just because he was a big guy. Because the other thing, like I said, when he was in his car, he was saying, all I can get to is my gun, because my mace is over here, and I'm using this hand to keep him from hitting me, right? And my baton's behind me, so I can't reach it because I'm kind of sitting on it. But once he was out of his car, and Michael Brown had run away from him, and created some distance, and was coming back towards him, there's no reason he couldn't have sprayed mace or taken out his baton. And since Michael Brown was unarmed, he could have apprehended him in an unarmed fashion. But he felt that his life was in danger, and I think it's because he was afraid of a big black man. Okay? What else?
Well, that's probably true, in fact, because, like,
Maybe.
it seems like that could have happened.
Right.
And that definitely seems like it could be a story, but yes, I do think he could have gone to trial, not been convicted. Just look at the evidence more, see whether he was walking or running or...
Yeah, if the evidence supported conviction, then he should have been convicted, right?
Yes.
If the evidence didn't support conviction, I don't think there was enough evidence. Just based on what I've looked at, they released a whole bunch of the grand jury testimony and stuff, so I've read some of the things that people were saying and the physical evidence and stuff like that, and so I think they probably couldn't have gotten a conviction. But I think he absolutely should have gone to trial. I think there's little question that he shouldn't have gone to trial. Yeah. And so, you know, the question is, so the way I described, I think there was racism involved in the shooting. Was there racism involved in the fact that the grand jury didn't send it to trial? Like, were the people on the jury biased in kind of the same way? Like, there's definitely a bias on a jury to trust police officers. Like, that exists, and that's kind of okay, frankly, for me.
It makes a little bit of sense. Like, these are the people that defend our law,
Yeah,
so why make them go...
Right, you're trusting
so why would
them.
they go against the law?
Yeah, you're putting a high burden on a police officer, and they sort of get the benefit of the doubt, I would say. Like, you don't just trust them blanketly, because they're certainly bad cops that do horrible things. But I think they get the benefit of the doubt sometimes, so there's some bias there. But then the question is, was there bias also that was sort of race-based? And, you know, how significant is it that Michael Brown had just robbed that store? Like, did that have anything to do with it? It didn't sound like at first the cop really knew much about it, and even if it did, like, that's no reason to shoot a guy. You don't want to kill him over stealing a handful of cigars.
Well, yeah,
right?
What seems like it happened is you said, go walk on the sidewalk, he was okay, and then maybe on the radio before or after or maybe while he was talking to the guy, or he noticed that he was holding some cigars. That's a perfectly normal thing that would happen a lot. Right. People hold cigars. So, but on the radio, maybe after he was driving back, he heard someone had robbed me from my cigars. Please go find them and arrest them. Right. And then he's like, that guy held cigars. Maybe I should go up and check and see if he was the guy that robbed the store. Yeah. So we went to check and see if he was the guy that robbed the store.
Okay, so here's where the camera cut out. Presley was talking about how you thought it was reasonable that the police officer, you know, kind of yelled at them to get off the street, and then either, you know, noticed that the guy was carrying the cigars, or that they weren't getting off the street or whatever, and so he backed back up to talk to them, and I think that's right about where it cut off. So you want to pick up from there a little bit? Do you remember kind of where you were?
Yeah, so our camera just cut off, so I'm going to kind of talk again about something I said last night, because of the camera cutting off incident. Yeah, so just start from there. This is all going to roll. So I think what might have happened is when they were walking down the street and the police officer came and said, can you go on the sidewalk? And then they said no, so he went back to what he was doing. And then he maybe heard the thing on the radio, someone stole my cigars, or maybe he was just mad that they disobeyed him or something. So he backed up to go talk to them again, and then everything started getting angry and started. Yeah, I think the door thing was probably a big deal, right? Like, he tried to open the door and the door slammed back on him, and he thought it was because Michael Brown slammed the door back on him, and maybe he did, maybe he didn't, right? But I think that kind of pissed him off and started things a little bit. But yeah, go ahead. So it could have been like the door thing where he pushed the door and the door got closed again somehow. Maybe Michael Brown pushed it, maybe it bounced off of Michael Brown, but the door got closed again, and then everything started getting escalating and everyone got mad, and that just wasn't a good thing. That started it all. I mean, I highly doubt it's because, like, he woke up in the middle of the morning, hey, I'm gonna go shoot someone black today. It's probably not because of it. He probably did it because he started getting scared when Michael Brown started getting really angry. So he would start getting scared, and I think they both got angry, right? Yeah. I think they both got mad. I think you're exactly right. And I think his Michael Brown's friend, even when he was describing what happened, said that they both just had on these angry faces and were mad at each other and were kind of fighting, right? And so, you know, the police officer probably grabbed him, but he fought back, and so they started fighting, and instead of like calming the situation down, it started escalating, and they got madder and madder and fought more and more, like you and Mommy do sometimes when you guys get in an argument, right? Yes. And so you guys can kind of escalate a little bit, and I have to step in and say, okay, let's chill out a little bit, right? You know, I think that a big part of a police officer's job is to calm situations down, not to escalate with them. Like, you don't have to
raise your level because the other person is raising theirs, right? So I think that was a mistake. If that's what happened, I think that was a problem.
Although I'm scared that if the police officer tried staying down, it might have gone to a little bit of passive aggressiveness, and that's always not very fun.
So yeah, I think he needed to kind of keep it toned down a little bit and not let it. But I think it did. It just spun out of control really quickly. And police officers are human beings, and that can happen. But when it ends in someone losing their life, then obviously things have gone way too far, and that's not acceptable for what the police officer needed to do, right? The other thing that you talked about last night that I want to get back a little bit is you were saying that you thought maybe that racism is only like one piece of the bigger problem, but you think what the bigger problem might be.
Okay, yeah. And I still think that maybe the inertia on the ball probably isn't just racism. I mean, there's a ton of people being very judgmental. Like, there's people being judgmental about gays, and there's people being judgmental about race. There's people being judgmental about basically everything.
Religion.
Religion. There is a lot of things that people are judgmental about. So maybe racism is just a tiny bit of that big ball that's rolling, and it's going to take more of a force to stop the whole thing. Right.
And what did you say you think it's really all about? All of those things are about kind of the same thing you said last night.
Yeah. And sometimes you might be a little judgmental towards somebody, and then you meet them. Like, you meet someone that is, like, say you're judgmental to someone with a different religion than you. You meet someone and you become great friends with the person with a different religion than you, and it changes your perspective forever on those people.
Right.
So so your perspective can be easily changed if you just try and have a chance to meet someone.
Right. And so you were saying last night that you think that's how we push back. Like, that's how we apply force, is we meet people. And travel for us is a big part of that. We talked about a little bit, some of that too.
That's how we apply force, is we meet people. We stop getting judgmental about that kind of person because, well, wow, these people are actually really nice. And then one person stops getting judgmental and applies a little bit more force. And slowly everyone stops it. It just stops.
Yeah. You were also saying that you think the reason that people that don't like or are prejudiced towards races or sexual preference or religion or all these different things is because they're different, right? So you were saying that really may be the core difference.
And maybe...
Or the core problem, I mean.
Yeah, maybe the biggest problem is people are afraid of different. I'm kind of afraid of different. I really don't like when something dramatically changes, but it's normally something randomly on the schedule. Like, but I don't like it when something changes, but still, I'm not afraid of people who are different than me. In fact, I like meeting people different than me, because if you meet someone who's exactly the same as you, then you'll be great friends, but because you like all the same things and everything is the same with you, it might get a little bit boring, and because you don't have new interests to share with the other person.
Right.
Like, say you have a friend and we both like everything the same, so the friend, one of my favorite parts about friends is they can introduce you to something new that you will love. Right. So, like, if you have friends that like the exact same things as you and are like almost the exact same as you, then you're not going to find anything new. You're going to stick with what you know. And sometimes sticking with what you know isn't actually good.
Yeah, no, I thought it was a really good point. I thought you brought up a great point that, again, we go back to like our Prop 8 conversation and like all the other conversations we've had where people, don't like things that are different. And sometimes they just hate things that are different than them, and they want to blame that for all kinds of problems. And so racism it ties to that, and homophobes tie to that, and people that hate other religions tie to that. It all kind of fits into, like, I think it was a really insightful point that you made.
Another reason that perhaps that people don't like some things that are different is maybe once they met someone mean who was different than them, and they thought all people who are different were like that.
Yeah, sure.
And that's not true. There are mean people and there are nice people. I mean, no matter what religion you have, what skin color you have, you always are who you are. You're not going to meet people. I mean, there's not every girl has really long hair, loves pink and princesses and Barbie. Oh my gosh, Barbie! Don't get me started on Barbie. No, that's not true.
Right.
You shouldn't judge, and if you judge people by my looks, like, hey, I have a pixie cut, I am female, still, I like pixie cuts, and it's actually, a pixie cut is kind of part of who I am now, because for some reason, I feel, like, happier with a pixie cut, like, honestly.
Right.
I don't know why. I like having short hair. Really, so I have short hair. I'm not a guy. Yes, I do like some things that guys like. That still does not mean I am a
little
guy.
tomboyish.
Yeah,
right. But that's okay.
Tomboyish.
And you get some hate for that sometimes.
Yeah,
right? And it's a tiny taste of what it's like. And like we talked about before, you can change that, right? There's something. I know you don't. I'm not asking you to change it, but I'm saying you can. You have the ability to, and you don't have to change. You can't change your skin color, right? You can't.
Yeah, you can't change your skin color.
It's something you just have to live with. And so that's one of the reasons I said earlier that, like, we can't really totally understand what it's like and what people go through, those things. But yeah, I thought those were really good points. And no, I don't want to run, even longer again, right? Have the whole conversation again, right? But yes. I thought you made some really good points, and I'm proud of you for how you sort of grasped it and what you talked about. Okay, so I think we're good. You want to sign off for us?
So yeah, thank you for watching, and I'll see you tomorrow. Bye!
Bye, everybody. Okay.